voting, like it's not just at the federal level, but at local levels in the U.S. Like the options that you have for voting are controlled, right? They're controlled by the two dominant parties in the U.S., which are both imperialist, bourgeois, and fascistic party. One that paints a liberal, or what some would call woke, veneer on top of their fascism. The other one which doesn't. And those are the two options that you get consistently with candidates. In Cuba, that's not the case. The people that are candidates are selected by the community. There's no party politics in that form, where it's bourgeois parties, the parties of this class that owns the means of production, that owns capital, that owns the big enterprises. Uh, you don't have that in Cuba. It's the people that are elected, and that guy that from that video, he talks about himself being elected for for a position when he didn't run. He was just, I think, a writer, a local writer, and the people liked him. They felt like he's the sort of person with the character that could put the interests of the people forward, and they elected him. And that often happens to the people that are like the most capable workers in their areas. I know my grandfather, that happened to him a couple times, and so it's an extremely popular and direct political democratic process.
So let me ask you this, because I just want to clarify. When it comes to people who are citizens in Cuba, are you called to serve in office like jury duty? Like, you don't personally say, "Oh, I'm going to run." It's more like, "Yeah, we choose you," kind of like a Pokemon reference, but we choose you to be our representative. Now, you can say yes or no, but if you say yes, then it's not because you wanted to do it. It's because the people wanted you. Am I getting that
Right.
correct?
Yeah, that is correct. And I mean, there's people that want to do it, and in order to do it, they need to show themselves capable of doing the job by serving the community, being
Wow.
capable of being seen in the eyes of the community as someone who can represent them. But it's just it's leaps and bounds ahead of anything we conceive of as democracy in the U.S. And when you hear these smears from U.S. pundits and with what Jose Marti, the apostle of the revolution, called gusanos de corbata, worms with bow ties. That's why we call in a derogatory fashion uh, parts of the exile community that are anti-Cuba and anti-communist. We call them gusanos today. Um, when you hear these people talk about Cuba as tyranny or an authoritarian government or a dictatorship, it's just completely absurd. It has nothing, not the slightest bit of totalitarianism. It's an extremely democratic form of government, and the only interest to which it would appear as if it's a dictatorship or authoritarian are the interests of capital. And so when you have an understanding of democracy and freedom that's tied to the freedom of capital and democratic rights of different sections of the capitalist class to choose what pundits and what puppets are going to put forward for the next 2 to 4 years, when that's your understanding of democracy and freedom, of course, Cuba, there's no freedom and no democracy. But when your understanding of democracy and freedom is rooted in the people and an understanding of the people actually determining their own future, and participating in self-determination and being an active process of the construction of their everyday life, then Cuba is, you just can't compare it. So this is one of those things that it perhaps requires a more philosophical approach, because these people love talking about democracy and freedom.
Hmm.
But Cuba also talks about democracy and freedom. But what we have to understand is that there's two types of freedoms. The freedom that they refer to here and the democracy that they refer to here, it's tied to capital. It's bourgeois capitalist democracy and capitalist freedom. It's the freedom to accumulate, the freedom to have the mass of the population exploited and oppressed for the sake of accumulating the capital that's in the hands of a very small number of society. In Cuba, that freedom is negated. That freedom, which inflicts on the freedom of others to live flourishing lives as human beings, that freedom is abolished. And so, from that standpoint, they're anti-freedom, right? But they're anti their freedom, the freedom of their capital, not they're the most in favor of human freedom as you can possibly be.
Well, it kind of goes in line with the whole tolerance tolerance argument. People say, well, intolerance accepts all, is tolerant of everything. And it's like, no, the only thing that tolerance is unacceptable of is intolerance. So if you have an ideology of intolerance, then therefore tolerance will not tolerate it. You know what I mean? And so it's the same thing in that same vein, is when it comes to, and somebody told me this years ago. They said true freedom does not encroach upon the rights of others. But if that right that you have encroaches upon other people's freedoms, well, then that's not really a freedom. So, like, for instance, when it comes to these corporations and these oligarchs, these big business types want to encroach upon our freedoms by using the government as their tool to take our freedoms away. Well, they're not for freedom. They're actually for tyranny. It's just they mask it as freedom. You know what I mean?